I still remember the way the light hit the kitchen tiles when he said it. 6:30, late spring, one window cracked open. I was slicing strawberries for a pie his mother liked. He walked in with his phone, tossed it on the table, and didn't even look at me. "You disgust me," he said. Logan told me everything. My hand froze mid-slice. The knife stayed where it was, blade deep in the cutting board, one strawberry half crushed beneath it. I blinked at the sound of his voice. Not loud, not cruel, just final. I thought he was joking. But then he picked up my phone from the counter, the one I'd left charging. "Why did you delete the text?" he asked, eyes narrowing like he'd already found the proof he wanted. I didn't delete anything. And I had no idea what everything meant. But that didn't matter. Not to him. Not with Logan's voice echoing louder than mine. I wanted to laugh, to scream, to say, "We've been married 12 years. Do I really have to defend myself from your brother?" But instead, I wiped my hands on the dish towel, set the knife down, and said nothing, because I already knew. Nothing I said would matter. He'd chosen who to believe, and it wasn't me. Have you ever had someone you love choose a lie over your truth? Let me know where you're listening from. And if this story feels like a bruise you've carried too long, hit subscribe. You're not alone. After that night, nothing looked the same in our home. Not the porch where we used to drink coffee on Sundays. Not the living room where we watched our daughter learn to walk. Not the hallway where Logan had once hung the family portrait smiling wide, as if he hadn't already planned to burn it all down. At first, it was just Nate's silence. He wouldn't talk about it. He said he needed space. But he kept looking at me like I was a stranger, like I was some masked version of myself he couldn't recognize anymore. The worst part, I still didn't know what Logan had said. I asked once softly over breakfast when Nate was buttering toast like it took all the focus in the world. "What exactly did Logan tell you?" He didn't look up. That you lied. That you manipulated. That you tried to ruin his marriage. That last one stopped me cold. I haven't even spoken to his wife in months. He showed me the screenshots, Noelle. There it was again, the same 4 words. Not "I believe you," not "I want to understand," just... He showed me the screenshots. Screenshots I never saw. Screenshots that could have been doctored, misread, sent by someone pretending to be me. But none of that mattered. Nate didn't ask. He didn't even offer to show them to me. Logan's lie was smarter than I gave him credit for. He didn't just attack my character, he made it look like I was playing a long game. Like I was friendly on the surface, vindictive underneath. A woman who smiled at Sunday dinner but stabbed people through texts on Monday morning. And because I was quiet by nature, introverted, private, cautious people believed it. That's the thing no one tells you. A woman who doesn't speak up fast enough is always suspect. We're taught to be calm, polite, gracious. But when lies come fast and your truth is slow, silence starts to look like guilt. I saw it first in Nate's sister, Corey. She used to send me funny memes photos of her kids in matching pajamas. Then one day she stopped replying. I messaged her 3 times. Nothing. And when I finally ran into her at a grocery store 2 towns over, she smiled too wide and said, "Oh, Noelle, hope you're doing okay." It felt like I was being consoled for my own death. Then came the whispers. At church, people stopped making eye contact. At work, I overheard my manager say, "You know she's not as sweet as she seems." Even the mailman hesitated when handing me a package one morning, like he was afraid to touch my palm. And through it all, Nate didn't say a word. He let it fester. Let Logan's version of me bloom like mold in a sealed room. And every time I tried to open a window, share my side, someone else had already swallowed the lie and spit it back out a little more bitter than before. I remember one Sunday standing in our driveway watching Logan pull up in a silver SUV. He got out sunglasses perched on his head, like a crown, and gave me that smirk, the one that said I won. Nate came out to greet him. They laughed, talked about sports. Meanwhile, I was inside holding a baby photo of our daughter and wondering if she'd grow up thinking I was some kind of villain too. Because Logan wasn't just targeting me, he was rewriting history. And Nate was handing him the pen. That night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and said out loud, "This is not who I am." I said it again and again until my voice cracked. But the mirror didn't answer. It never does. And when I turned off the light and walked back into our dark bedroom, I knew if I stayed silent any longer, the lie would become my truth. I never meant for anyone to read my journal. It started as a collection of quiet thoughts, just a soft place to land when everything else felt too sharp, too loud, too wrong. The first entry was dated 2 days after Logan moved back to town. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it. He'd been gone for nearly 7 years, and when he returned, he brought with him a polished charm and a tight-lipped smile. Nate said he needed help. Said we should give him a place to stay until he found his footing. So I said yes. Because that's what wives do, right? We say yes. We make room. But the pages told another story. Logan watches me when he thinks I don't notice I wrote once. It's not the way a brother-in-law should look at someone. And I don't know how to tell Nate without sounding paranoid. That was 3 months before everything started to spiral. Another entry dated mid-November. Nate's been distant. He won't meet my eyes. I asked him about Thanksgiving plans, and he said, "Whatever you want, Noel," like he wasn't really there. Like someone else was answering for him. The words I wrote were raw, too raw to say out loud. So I buried them in ink behind soft leather covers stacked beneath winter scarves in my closet. I never thought anyone would find them. Not even Nate. Especially not Logan. But somehow he did. That realization didn't come with fireworks or shouting. It came quietly, like everything else in that slow burn betrayal. One night I walked into our bedroom to find Nate holding the journal open on his lap. He didn't look up, didn't ask why I had written any of it. Instead he said, "So this is what you really think of us." I didn't know what to say, because it wasn't us I was writing about. It was me, trying to understand why I felt invisible in my own life. Why Logan's presence had shifted the air in our home. Why Nate stopped reaching for my hand under the covers. That journal was never meant to be evidence, but in Nate's hands, it became a verdict. And somehow, I was already sentenced. 2 days after Nate found the journal, I noticed the change. He didn't confront me again. He didn't ask questions, didn't bring it up, but the silence grew teeth. He began coming home later. His voice turned flat, polite, almost distant, like we were colleagues cohabiting out of necessity, not love. And Logan, he was more present than ever, hovering, smirking, making breakfast like he was part of the family. And Nate let him. One morning, as I packed Maisie's lunch, Logan leaned against the counter beside me and whispered, "You know secrets always find their way out, Noel." I didn't answer. I just tightened the cap on Maisie's water bottle and stepped away. But inside I froze, because something had shifted, and I didn't know how far it would go. That afternoon, I got a call from Maisie's school. Ms. Ashford, the secretary, said, her voice hesitant. Maisie mentioned something odd about home. We just wanted to check in, make sure everything is all right. I assured her it was. Thanked her for calling, hung up and sat in the hallway for a long time. Maisie was only 8. What had she heard? That evening when I asked her if anything felt strange lately, she looked up from her coloring book and said, "Daddy said you write mean stories about Uncle Logan." My throat tightened. "They're not stories," I whispered. Maisie shrugged. "He said if you were nicer, maybe Uncle Logan wouldn't be so sad." There it was. Logan had twisted my words. The ones never meant to be read into poison. He'd shown Nate what he wanted him to see. Maybe even pulled out a few pages, circled sentences, painted himself the victim. And Nate believed him. Because it's easier, isn't it, to trust the version of reality that absolves you. That night I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan, wondering when the axis of my life had shifted. When the man who once memorized my coffee order stopped defending me. When my words became weapons used against me. They called it a journal, but to them it was a confession, and Logan. He was no longer just Nate's brother. He was the knife Nate willingly handed to someone else. It was a Tuesday evening damp, outside fog curling low along the street, like a quiet warning when I found Maisie at the kitchen table scribbling with fierce concentration. She had her crayons out, her favorite purple one worn down to the paper. "What are you working on, sweetheart?" I asked, trying to sound light. She didn't look up. "Homework," I smiled. "Math." She shook her head. "Feelings." I stepped closer. On the paper was a drawing, simple but unmistakable. 3 people sitting at a dinner table. One of them, a woman with red hair just like mine, was drawn with a frown. A single tear-colored blue trailing down her cheek. Across from her 2 other figures, a man and another man both smiling. "Maisie," my voice caught. She looked up. "That's you," she said, pointing. "You're sad 'cause Daddy listens to Uncle Logan now, and you eat alone." I couldn't speak. She pulled out another paper. This one was filled with short sentences, half-spelled words, a child's attempt to write what couldn't be said aloud. "Mom is good. She hugs me. Uncle Logan says bad things. Dad says not to tell." My hand went to my mouth. All the pain I'd tried to shield her from, she'd been absorbing like a sponge. And now she was pressing it gently back into my hands. "I know Daddy's mad," she said quietly. "But I don't think you're bad. I think you're quiet sad." I knelt beside her, pulled her into my arms, and for the first time in weeks let my eyes close around something warm. Maisie didn't know all the details, but she knew enough. Enough to draw the loneliness. Enough to name the ache. Enough to see the lines forming where truth had been rewritten. And in that moment, I realized something. I hadn't vanished. I'd just gone silent. And maybe it was time to speak. Not for Nate, not even for Logan, but for Maisie. Because she was watching and writing and remembering. And what she remembered, I would not let them rewrite. When I closed the door behind me that morning, I didn't slam it. There was no suitcase. Just a worn canvas bag with 2 changes of clothes and Maisie's favorite bedtime book, The Moon Is Still There. I didn't say goodbye to Nate. He was still asleep or pretending to be. Logan had left earlier for a meeting, though I suspected that meant anywhere I wasn't. Maisie was with my sister for the weekend. I needed a pause, not an escape. A place to think, breathe. But that wasn't how the story was told. By nightfall, the calls began. First from Nate's mother, then his friend Jonathan, then the school counselor. "Noelle, is everything all right? Nate's very worried." He said, "You walked out. You left without a word. He says you might not be well." I sat in the cheap motel room staring at the chipped paint and humming air conditioner, the world tilting slightly as my name unraveled from my own hands. By the next morning, the narrative had spread like mold, quiet, invasive, and hard to scrub away. She's unstable. She abandoned her family. She left her child. No one asked why. No one asked me. Nate and Logan were doing what they did best, rewriting the story in real time, shaping the version that made them saviors, not saboteurs. They told people I had episodes, that I was emotionally unpredictable, that I'd been seeing someone maybe, that I'd left to find myself. I was the villain in a script I never auditioned for. And the worst part, it worked. I saw it in the way neighbors looked at me when I returned to the house 2 days later to pick up more things. The way Logan watched me from the porch with that same knowing smirk. "Didn't think you'd come back," he said. "I'm not here to talk." "Sure," he shrugged. "Just don't forget your meds next time, Noelle." I didn't answer. Because that's how you lose a war like this, by reacting. Instead, I looked up at the security camera mounted just above the garage, blinking silently in the morning sun. Let them record. Let them build their fiction. I had started building something too. Proof. Emails Nate deleted but I'd archived. Calendar entries from the nights Logan said he wasn't there, but was. Screenshots of texts. Medical records showing Maisie's appointments I alone had taken her to, while they spun their own stories. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done asking for clarity. I was building it. And when I stood in Maisie's empty room tracing my fingers along the edge of her bookshelf, I knew truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to wait. And I was very, very patient. The school cafeteria smelled like overcooked spaghetti and pine sol. Maisie's school had a policy one family night a semester open to all parents or guardians. They called it bridge night. Cute in theory, excruciating in practice. I hadn't planned to go, but something told me this was the room where lies got nodded along to where concerned fathers got polite applause, and where mothers like me, quiet, unpolished, uninvited, sat in the corner pretending not to mind. But not tonight. Nate was already there, Logan too, standing near the juice table laughing with the PTA lead like nothing in his life had ever gone wrong. When I walked in, I didn't look at either of them. I went straight to Mrs. Kellerman, Maisie's homeroom teacher, and handed her a manila envelope. She blinked. "What's this context?" I said. She opened it as I stepped back. Inside were copies of Maisie's attendance records, appointment slips, school emails showing who signed off what, voicemails transcribed, even a screenshot from the parent portal Logan trying to lock me out of access last month. Mrs. Kellerman looked up slowly. A tremor passed between us. "Thank you," she said quietly. I turned and walked toward the front of the room where the parent volunteers were being introduced. Nate stepped forward. "I'd like to say a few." I raised my hand. "Actually," I said, "I'd like to speak first." The room quieted. I didn't have a microphone. I didn't need one. For the last few months I've been told who I am. A woman who walked out. A mother who disappeared. A wife who lost her grip. That story's made its way around the school. I'm not here to defend myself. I'm here to correct the record. I took a breath. This is Maisie's school, not Nate's, not Logan's, and if anyone wants to know where I've been, ask her. She'll tell you. I never left her. I paused. Some people think silence is an admission. It's not. It's preparation. Logan shifted his face, starting to twitch. And now I added, I'm done being silent. I didn't wait for applause. I didn't need validation. I walked out as a low murmur filled the room. By the time I reached the sidewalk, my phone buzzed. A text from Maisie's principal. "Thank you for tonight. We hear you." Then another, from a parent I barely knew. I believed what they said. "I'm sorry," and another. "You changed the room." I stood still under the cold streetlight, the night humming. That's the thing about whispers. They can rot your name for months, but sometimes, just sometimes, they can knock a wall down. It started with a drawing. Maisie had taped it to the fridge while I was upstairs folding laundry. I almost missed it, just another colorful mess of markers and glitter, one of dozens that covered our fridge like leaves. But this one was different. The house in the center looked like ours. Slate roof, red front door, and on the lawn stood 3 figures. One tall, one small, and one crossed out in black crayon. Maisie had drawn an X through the tallest figure. I stared at it for a moment too long. When she wandered into the kitchen, she stopped behind me. "You saw it," she said. I nodded. "I did." "That's not Daddy," she said. "That's Logan. He thinks he's Daddy now." I turned slowly. "Maisie," she bit her lip. "He says I should stop asking about you at his house. He says you're confused, that you don't know what's best for me anymore." I knelt to her level. "And what do you think, sweetheart?" Her answer was immediate. "I think Logan is lying." She was 6'6" and already sorting truth from poison. I pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, the faint trace of paint and peanut butter. "Then I want you to know something," I whispered. "No one gets to replace your mom. Not even if they try real hard." Maisie nodded into my shoulder. And then she said the thing that made my knees nearly give. Do I get to say that out loud? That was the moment I knew. This wasn't just about my voice anymore. It was hers, too. The email came on a Wednesday. Subject line: a quick chat about Maisie. I sat still for a moment, hands cold, that familiar squeeze in my chest like something was wrong before I even opened it. It was from her teacher, Ms. Lane. We met after school. She smiled gently, invited me into the empty classroom. Maisie shared something today, she said. She brought a journal page, said it was yours. My breath caught. From home, Ms. Lane nodded. She read it aloud. The whole class listened. She opened a folder, one sheet of notebook paper creased in the middle, my handwriting, sharp, a little shaky. I knew the words before she spoke them. It was from the night Julian sided with his brother. The night he said, "You always overreact." Maybe that's the real problem. I had written, "If telling the truth makes me difficult, then difficult is what I'll be, even if I have to do it alone." Maisie had underlined that line in purple crayon. She said it was about bravery, Ms. Lane said softly. She said, "This is what my mom sounds like when she's brave." I covered my mouth, not to cry, just to breathe. Was she okay? I asked. She was steady, quiet, but proud. It mattered to her. Driving home, I glanced at the mirror. Maisie sat in the back seat swinging her feet, looking out the window as if nothing had changed. But everything had. "You took something from my journal," I said gently. She didn't flinch. "I thought it was too quiet at school," she said. "I wanted someone to know you still had a voice." That night, I didn't hide the journal. I left it open on the kitchen counter, pages turning slowly with the breeze from the window. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like a ghost in my own house. I felt heard by the one voice that mattered most. He stood in the doorway holding the envelope I'd left on the table. Maisie wasn't home. She was at Grace's for the weekend. I had planned it that way. He cleared his throat like he was about to speak, but nothing came. "I figured you'd come," I said, not looking up. "Eventually." He took one slow step inside. "Why now?" he asked. His voice was rough. I kept folding laundry, his shirt the one I almost threw out last year. I placed it gently in the donate pile. "You always said I was too dramatic," I said. "Too sensitive, too much." He didn't deny it, didn't move. "I thought silence would make me smaller," I went on. "But it made you louder. Louder than truth. Louder than me." He opened the envelope. Inside was a photocopy of Maisie's journal page, the one with my handwriting and her purple underlines. He read it slowly, twice, then looked up. "She's proud of you," he said quietly. It sounded like a confession. "I know." Another long pause. I could feel him scanning the room as if it suddenly wasn't his anymore. "She'll want to see you," he added. "Eventually. She will, but on her terms, not yours." He took a breath like he was going to argue, then let it go. "Is there someone else?" he asked. It came out small, tired. "No," I said, "but there will be, someday. And when there is, he won't need me to disappear so he can feel whole." He didn't reply. I picked up the last folded towel. "Lock the door on your way out." He stood there a moment longer, then turned and left. Quiet, like a man walking out of a home that no longer remembered him. Sometimes closure doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with a door closing softly, and no one running after you. I didn't vanish to punish him. I vanished to find myself again. Maisie gave me back my voice with a journal page I thought I'd hidden too deep. And now I keep that page on my desk, not as a reminder of pain, but of what truth can survive when silence no longer serves us. So if you're listening to this from a quiet kitchen or a parked car, outside a house that no longer feels like home, know this: you're not alone, and you're not too late to write your own ending. Where are you listening from tonight? If this story stayed with you, don't forget to subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear that they are not invisible. Your voice still matters, even when they tried to write you out of the story.